G'day everyone, Percy here from toptechskills.com. Today we're back with another Exercism coding challenge in the functional programming language Elixir. Today's challenge is called Tournament, which is our first medium difficulty problem that we've done. All the previous ones have been easy. I've loaded the problem up into VS Code, so let's jump over there, take a look at it and solve it. Let's load up the README and take a look at what it says. Tournament, tally the results of a small football competition based on an input file containing which team played against which, and what the outcome was. Create a file with a table like this. So we have our header line, we have our teams listed, and we have some abbreviations at the top, which are explained here. MP means matches played, W means wins, D means draws, L means losses, and P means points. A winning team earns 3 points, a draw 1, and a loss earns 0. The outcome should be ordered by points, which we can see here. The Devastating Donkeys have 7, Allegoric Alaskans 6. In case of a tie, teams are ordered alphabetically. In tallying, your tallying program will receive input that looks like this. So what I can see here is that we have multiple lines, and each one we have a team separated by a semicolon, another team, and then we have the outcome of the match. The result of the match refers to the first team listed. So this line, Allegoric Alaskans Blithering Badgers win, means that the Allegoric Alaskans beat the Blithering Badgers, and etc. So that's fine. I think that we should jump over to the tests, take a look at what we're actually going to receive, and then we can start implementing it. So our first test here is typical input. We have our lines as expected with the results, Allegoric Alaskans versus Blithering Badgers, and win, which means Allegoric Alaskans won. We have all the other results, and this is what our function needs to return. So we need to return a nicely formatted string there with a header line, and the teams returned with the sorting being points descending. Let's jump over to our tournament module. We've got a little comment there, given input lines representing 2 teams, blah, blah, blah. Basically what we need to do is take this and turn it into this. So from what I can understand about this problem, we're going to need to split this into 2 parts. I think firstly what we want to do is we'd like to convert these lines into a representation of the statistics. And then once we have the representation of the statistics, we can then format them nicely, sorted and all that sort of stuff. My personal feeling is that converting this into a map, where we have the map keys being the teams, will be the best way to do it, because that's really what we're doing in this tabular output. Is that we have a team and then we're showing its statistics. So if we can have a map that is essentially like this, then we're going to be in a good position to be able to format it like this table. So let's jump over here. What I always like to do is just return the input. We'll jump back to the test. At the top of the test, there's a line that we can paste into IEX. So first what I'll do is take this input and we'll just load that into IEX so we have something to play around with. All right, load that into IEX. Let's also get that line and load that into IEX, and then we can start coding away. We've loaded the file, and what we'd like to test is our input function. So in IEX, I'm going to do tally, and then the input is what we've just put into the IEX there. So as you can see there, we're literally just printing out what we're getting in, and that just shows us that our function's working and we're seeing output. Now what we need to do is to convert this into some sort of stats map. So I think probably the best way that we're going to do this is by first splitting this up into lines and then doing an enum.reduce. The reason I think that we need to use enum.reduce is because, as you remember, if you've watched any of my previous streams, enum.reduce is really useful if you've got a list of a particular length, and what you're trying to do is to convert that into a list of different length or a different sort of item, or you're trying to sum it up into one thing. In this case, what we're trying to do is we're trying to take a list of an indefinite number of lines and we're trying to group it by the team, and then we're trying to increment some multiple things. So that's a perfect use case for reduce. What we have there is we have a list of lines and we'd like to reduce the lines. So what we're going to do first is we're just going to pass in the initial, and after that we need a function. So the function is going to take each line, and what we can do with each line is then also pass in the accumulator. And there we go. So what we can do here is I'm just going to pass the line to io.inspect. so we can see what's happening. And I'm just going to return the accumulator just so we can start building this in IEX and actually seeing what the enum.reduce is actually doing. Hi there in stream chat, Twitch chat. We've got Reason X. We're making a little, we're doing a little coding challenge where we need to take input like this and turn it into output like this. So I am just going to return the accumulator here. I'll jump back down into IEX, reload the code, and run that again. As you can see here, this is printing out all the lines that we've got. And what we'd like to do is actually interpret these somehow and start implementing our stats. What we really want to do is we'd like to split each line with string.split with the semicolon. And that's going to give us our two teams as well as the outcome. Let's reload the code down here, run it again. And that hasn't been saved, I think. Let's run that again. Okay, and it's because we're not inspecting it. I apologize. We're not inspecting it there. Let's reload the code again, run it. And as you can see here, what we're getting out is we're getting a list, and we have two teams, and then the outcome of the function. And what we'd like to do here is, because we're going to do different things depending on whether it's a win, a draw, or a loss, is that I'd like to pass it to a case statement. So with case, you can actually pipe to case like this, and we have three distinct success cases. So we have one where we have the winner, a loser, and then win at the end of it. So you can see here, that's the case that we have here first. We have another case where we have a draw. So we have, let's call it just team 1, team 2, and draw. And that's our second line there. We have another case where we have a loss. So we have a loser, a winner, and then loss. And we can handle each one of these cases separately. What I usually like to do with a case as well is that you have a default case that will match anything, and we can just return the accumulator. What that basically means is that if there's a line that's not formatted correctly, so for instance, if we do a string.split and it isn't one of these three cases, so that may be that the string's formatted incorrectly, there may be an incorrect character, all we're going to do is we're just going to ignore the line, we're going to pass back the accumulator without modifying it. So for the win, we need to handle a winner, and what we're going to do is we're going to do something to the accumulator. Okay, and what I'll do here is I'll just do the accumulator because we're going to be piping it to multiple functions. And what we want to do here is, let's say we have the accumulator and we have a win. What we'd like to do is update the accumulator map, and for the winner, we want to update the statistics for the winner, right? So if we pass it to map.update with a default of the empty map, and then what we're going to do is we'll just do a function of current stats, and we'll just return the current stats. We've got that. We also need to update the loser, right? So in here, in the future, what we're going to implement is we're going to increment the wins, we're going to increment the losses, and we're going to increment the points and matches played, etc. And here as well, we need to update the loser. Okay? Let's do this down here as well. And here we have team 1 and team 2, and here we'll also be incrementing things, team 1, team 2, and then finally we have the same thing for the loser and winner. That's just where the order is different. What I'm feeling here is that it may be a little bit cleaner if we start putting these into separate functions. Before I do that though, let's take a look at what actually comes out of this when we reload the code down here in IEX. And so what you can see here, we are returning the accumulator at the end. Actually, let me just remove that. So here we have it, right? Because we're not updating anything, our map.update is literally just going to put the empty map in there. And what we're getting out is we're getting the allegoric Alaskans, blithering badgers, courageous Californians, etc. Because we haven't done anything specific depending on whether they've won or lost, all we're getting is the empty map. So what we need to do now is we need to react to whether they've won or whether they've lost. So let me see here. What I'd like to do is, instead of doing a map.update and doing something specific in here, let me do that as an example first. So for example, let's update the winner. And what we'd like to do is, for the default case, If this doesn't exist in the accumulator, we'd like to just set wins to 1, matches played to 1, and points to 3, right? Because a win, if you remember from the README, is worth 3 points. And what we'd like to do in here, if this already exists in the accumulator, right? Let's say that the winner of this team is already in the accumulator. What we'd like to do is do another map.update and increment various things. So for instance, we will have the current stats. We'll do a map.update for wins up here, as you can see. We'll do a map.update for wins, a map.update for matches played, and a map.update for points. So we have map.update, and what we'll do is we'll do that on the keys wins, and the initial, we'll make it 1, and then the function will be, we'll call this current wins, and it'll be current wins plus 1. Let's copy that line. We'll go down and we'll paste it 2 times, because what we have here is matches played. That's what we're incrementing there. And then finally here we have points. So let me update that, current points. And instead of incrementing that by 1, we'd like to increment it by 3, and we'd like the default to be 3 as well. Let's save that now. Obviously, we haven't applied this to all of our other things, but we should now have one team or multiple teams in here that have some wins and some points and some matches played statistics. Let's reload the code, jump in, and you can see here that the Allegoric Alaskans have won 2 games and Devastating Donkeys have won 1 game and they have points 3. So this is working, but if we start rolling this out to all these other functions, it's going to get messy very, very quickly. So what I'd like to do down here is start implementing some private functions that will handle a winning case, handling a losing case, and a draw case. So let's start fleshing out those functions. So let's call it update winner, and then what that will accept is the accumulator, the winner, the name of the winner, and that's basically it, okay? And what we're going to do is replicate that a few times. And actually, let's change this to update win, just because draw is going to be a little bit strange. And what we'll do here is update loss. And what we want here is the loser. And then what we'll do here is update draw. And here we have just the team, right? Because we don't know whether they've won or lost. It's just the team that lost. So in here, what we have is we can just copy and paste this down into our update win function. Right, and here, just put the accumulator argument back in. Let's do that. And instead of what we had there, we can just put update win, and we'll just pass in the winner. And because we're passing the accumulator through the pipe, that will be the first argument. Let's reload the code and see if that's still working. So that's working exactly the same, but we've cleaned this up. And now what we can do actually in here, because we have a loss here, we're still doing a map.update for the winner, because the winner is just the second one in the argument. And what we'll do is we can just literally copy and paste this. And actually, our handling winner and loser is going to be the same. Now that we've updated that, let's reload the code and take another look. And now we have blithering badges in there. All right, so we're building this out bit by bit. So let's have a look at what we'd need to do for a loss. And what I'm going to do initially is I'm just going to copy and paste that in there so we have something to work with. And instead of a winner, we're going to have the loser. And instead of wins, we'll have losses. Matches played is still 1, and points is going to be 0 because it's 0 points for a loss. And here with the map.update, instead of wins, we're going to change this to losses. And down here in points, because we're going to be passing in an initial of 0 points anyway, and we don't want to increment the points at all, we'll just remove this line. So what's going to happen is when we pass in the loser, it's going to update the current statistics, increment the losses, increment the matches played, and not change the points, right? Because it's 0 points. While we're here, let's increment a draw as well. Sorry, let's implement the draw function. So update for draw, instead of winner, that's going to be team. Instead of wins, that's going to be draws. Matches played 1, and points. If you remember from the README, the points for a draw is 1. And so what we'll change down here, again, wins, we'll change that to draws. Points, that's fine, but we'll increment it by 1, and we'll make the default 1 down here. And that should actually be all of our statistics. If I start replacing these, so here we have update loss, and then we'll put in the loser. Let me copy that line there and I will paste it in here. Got the update loss. And then in here, we have 2 times that we need to call update draw. And instead of loser, it's just going to be team 1. We're going to update it, and then team 2. Let's reload the code down here and take a look what we get out. Awesome. So Allegoric Alaskans have 1 loss, 3 matches played, 6 points, and 2 wins. Obviously, the order is alphabetical in here, so it's not going to be as nice as we want it. Blithering, and I think this is going to be our full statistics that we're going to need. The one thing that I notice now is that we have some, and we have the potential, if a team only loses, we're going to have an empty key for wins. It just so happens that the input that we've got for this particular case is that all of them have losses, all of them have wins, and and here's a good example. This one doesn't have a draws key, right? This one has a draws key, but this one doesn't. And the reason is that these 2 teams haven't drawn. And this is going to cause a problem later if we assume that the map has a draws key. I think the best way to handle this is to make sure that our initial that we pass in has all of the keys set to 0, and that we can increment these specifically. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to make another little function, and I'm going to call it merge init. And in here, it's just going to accept a map. And what we'll do is do a map.merge with the initial map. And so this would be basically if we were to initialize every key in the map to have the same thing. We're going to say wins 0, losses 0, draws 0, matches played 0, and then points 0. This is going to be where every team starts off. And all we need to do now in our individual functions that are implementing this properly is to just merge this with our init. So we can just call that merge init function down there, and I'll just copy and paste that through, and we'll see what happens to our result once we do that. We just paste all that in, merge init, cool, save that, reload the code, and run it again. And I have made a mistake here, yes, because I haven't put the second argument there in for map.merge. One thing to keep an eye on with map.merge is the fact that it's going to overwrite whatever you pass in as the first argument with the second argument. So if our second argument has matches played set, it's going to override what's in the first one. So you just need to be wary of the way that you merge things, because the second one is always going to overwrite the first one. Let's reload the code again. And there we go, we have it properly. And now you can see that we have all of the keys in there correctly. They all have the same 5 keys. They all have draws, losses, matches played, points, and wins, even if they're 0, right? And now we have a nice position where we can start actually formatting this code quite nicely. This should be all of the statistics that we need in order to give them the output that they expect. Let me clean up the code a little bit here so we don't have this io.inspect, and we'll just see what we get out of this. Format the code a little bit nicely. No io.inspects. Let's reload the code again. We can see here that this is our output. So this is the first stage of the solution that I mentioned. The stages being 1, we need to calculate the statistics. That's now done. Now what we need to do is print the output. So let's have a look what we get here. What I'd like to do in here as well, since our main function is already, 23 to 39. So we have 26 lines of code for our main function. If we start adding more stuff to this function, it's just going to get really unclear. What I'd like to do is take our current tally function and just put all of this into another separate function so our main function is easier to read. And what this function does is it's calculating statistics. So I'm just going to call this calculate stats. And what it's going to receive is our input. So we'll call this input lines. And what I can do here is literally just cut that, paste that, and we'll just put input lines in there. And then here in input, we can just use calculate stats. And our main function now is a lot smaller, right? And this is just a nice way to refactor the code so everything's a little bit more readable. We'll reload the code just to make sure it's still doing the same thing. That's perfect. And now what we need to do is we'd like to get the lines to print. So here we have our stats. Let's call this stats. right? And what we need to do is now we need to convert our stats into something that we can print. So let's go lines to print is equal to some function that we haven't implemented yet. What I'm going to call it is get lines to print. And what we're going to pass in is stats. So let's start implementing this function. And we'll call it get lines to print. And we have our stats. And what the stats looks like is what we've got in our output there. And what we'd like to do is to convert this into a list of lines to print. So first of all, we have a map, and the best way that we're going to get our stats map into something that is a list is to just use map.toList. And what we can do is, since we've updated our code, let's reload that and see what comes out. So instead of a map, we now have a list of our things. It's not sorted, and if you remember, there's a very particular sorting that we need to do. What I'm going to do initially is I'm just going to sort by points, and I'm not going to sort by name, and we can come back later and sort by name. So now that we have a list, what we need to do is use our enum.sort function on the enumerable. And because we have a fairly complex list, right? It's not just a simple thing, because if I jump down in here, enum.sort, and I do a list of 3 to 1, that's going to be really easy to sort. But if you have a complex list like we've got here, it's not going to know what to sort by. It's not going to know that we want to sort by the points key. So instead of sort, what we're going to use is sort by, right? And the function that we pass into there first is going to be a mapper. And what that means is it's going to take our input, which is a team name, and then we have a map, and it's going to have points in there. All we want to return out of that is the points key, because that's all we're really concerned about, right? So now, just with the mapper, we haven't even done a custom sorting function. That should now be sorting our results by the points. Let's try that. And we can see here that Courageous Californians is first with 1 point and Devastating Donkeys is last with 7 points. And that's because it's sorted ascending by default. And what it's doing, how it's doing that is because it's using kernel dot, what is it using? Less than or equal to as the sorting function. Okay, and that's there. If we change that to greater than or equal to, that should reverse our list. The other thing that we could do is use enum.reverse, but I think I'd prefer to just change the sorting function, since we're going to need to change it later to handle the fact that we want to first sort by points and then sort by name. For now, we're just sorting by points, and I want to reverse it, so I've changed the function from less than or equal to greater than or equal to. And if we jump back down into IEX, take a look at what happens. We now have Devastating Donkeys at the top with 7 points, and we have it in descending order of points, which is exactly what we want. Now that we have that, what we'd like to do is convert each one of these tuples into the line that we want to print out. If we take a look at this, we're going to implement the header line as a separate thing, but what we want is to convert our list of tuples into this, right? So what we need is the name, we need the matches played, the wins, the draws, the losses, and the points. And we need to format it in the correct way. Because I can see here, and this is pointed out by the README, that this is 30 characters long. And what we want is for all of these to be the same, and we're going to use the string.pad leading and string.pad trailing to do that. So what we can do here is, now that we have that, we have our stats, we have our sorted lines, what we need to do is an enum.map on those to convert them into lines to print. Enum.map is where we're taking each item, we're applying some function to it, and we're taking what gets returned out. So the function that is going to receive the team and the stats. And let's just start with an example. So since we're going to be printing the team name first, let's just put it in there. So we'll use string.pad trailing. We can see in the README here that they all end at the same point. Even though this one is a different length to this one, they both end at the same point. And from the README, it says that they are right padded to a space of 30, the title. And what we'll do in our thing here, pad trailing. And what we want is the team name, and we want it padded to 30. And let's take a look what that does to our function. Right, so we have our lines, but now what we need to do is we need to add the next part of the output, which would be the matches played. For matches played, I think probably what we want to do is first calculate the matches played. So what I'm going to do is do a string.pad leading, and that's because we have lead padding here. They both end, all of these end at the same point. So we're going to do string.pad leading, and it will be the matches played, which we haven't yet calculated, matches played and a pad leading of 2. Let's calculate the matches played. Matches played, what's that going to equal? So that's going to equal to our stats.wins plus stats.draws plus stats.losses. Awesome. Let's reload the code, take a look what that outputs. I've made a little mistake here. String.pad leading, matches played, and that's because we haven't made this a string. This will just be an integer. So what I'm going to do is, let's just put that in there, and we'll pass it to kernel.toString. Right, so if anyone's not clear on what happened there, the reason that I got an error is because I've called string.pad leading, matches played was actually an integer, and what it needs to be is a string. All I've done here is I've taken what we add together to get our integer, pass it to kernel.toString, which will just convert it to a string. If we reload the code now, that should all work. Very nice. So we're starting to build out our lines that we need to print for the table. And what I'm starting to notice here is that this is getting very messy already. And what we've got is we have this string.pad inside these string interpolation. And what I'd like to do is just pull that out. And so what I'll do is, instead of doing that in here, I'm going to call this team string. And what I'll do is pull this function out. I'll call this team string. Put that there. Same with this one. I'm going to pull this out. I'll call this matches string. And I'll put that here, matches string. Okay, and now we just need to go through and do this for the other items. If I go back to this, we have wins, draws, losses, and points. So what we have here is wins, string, draws, string, losses, string, and then finally we have points string. And I can see this is already getting quite long. If I format this, it's going to split the point string onto the second line, which I don't like. What I'll do here is just split the string and use a string concatenation character and move this down to a second line. If we format that, that's quite nice. So now we have matches string, win string, draw string, losses string, and point string. What we need to do is then implement those variables up here. So we have wins string, and what's that going to be? That's going to be stats.wins, and we need to do string.pad leading. So we have stats.wins, and we have a count of 2. Okay, let's copy that, paste that down. Wins, we have draws, here we have losses. And finally we have points. Let's put that down here as well. Instead of losses, it will be points. And they're all string.padded with 2. If I format the code now, let's reload it and see what we get. I've missed another thing. Again, I haven't passed in. These are still integers, and what this expects is a string. So what I'm going to do is just a quick way to convert that. Rather than using kernel.toString, what we can do instead is just put strings around it and do a string interpolation like that. And that just means that we save having a function call. Let's do stats.draws. Let's do the same thing with stats.losses. Oops, sorry. First we need the string, then interpolate it. String, interpolate. Let's reload the code again. And now we have what seems very, very, very close to what the output that we need is. So here, the only thing missing that I can see is that we have a header line and the fact that this is all one string. This is all one string, and down here we still have a list. So what we need to do is go from a list to a string, And the way that we join those is with a new line in between them. So it's like we've pressed enter at the end of each one. So if we go back and now in here, after enum.map, let's do an enum.join. And if we just do enum.join without any arguments, it's going to use a comma, I believe. Let's see what happens. So actually, no, it's just an empty string. It's just joined it all together. And what we want is we'd like to join it with a new line. So that each one is on its own line. Let's reload the code and take a look. Take a look at that. And we have a new line, but this isn't formatted correctly. All I'm going to do down in here is just pass this to io.puts instead, just so we can actually see what it's like formatted. And this is our string. So actually we're very, very close. We're very, very close. All we're missing now is the header line. So now that we have the lines to print, let's just get the header line from here. So rather than having to do this ourselves, let's just get the header line here. So the output of our function is now going to be that. We'll have our team there, right? And if we take a look now, let's put our lines to print. Lines to print variable in there. Reload the code. Take a look and we'll pass it to io.puts. Boom. All right, we now have our fully formatted table string with the team, matches played, wins, draws, losses, and it's sorted by points descending. I think we should be pretty close to being able to pass some of those tests, and then we'll see where we stand in terms of the tests. Okay, cool. So that's our first test. It's already uncommented. Let me just get the line here to run tests. Let's jump back down, get out of IEX, and we'll run the tests. And we failed the first test where I thought that we would be passing. And I can see here at the end, the difference is we have an extra new line. And that's a result of the fact that we're using this notation, this here doc notation. It's automatically going to put a new line at the end of that final variable that we have there. This is a fairly simple one. All I'm going to do is just add a string.trim at the end, which is going to remove any new lines or white space. And now we should be passing the test. Very, very nice. So our typical input, we are now passing that test, and we can start having a look at the other tests to see if they have anything that's more challenging for us. Let's uncomment this one. Incomplete competition. Not all player pairs have played. And this is solved by the fact that we are passing in that default value. If you look down here, our merge init is going to make sure that no matter if not all of them have played, they're still going to start from that same map with the correct keys. Let's see if that test passes. Awesome, that test is passing. Next one, Is Broken Alphabetically. So here we have that next challenge that they're talking about. We have two teams on 7 points and two teams on 1 point, and 1 point, I apologize. And what we need to do is to make sure that it's in ascending order of alphabet in terms of the team's name, but descending order in terms of points. And this is a fairly complex sort function, right? And I'm going to show you how to do that. We'll comment this out and just make sure that that test actually fails. We'll see the difference. And that shouldn't have happened. So we've passed that test. That shouldn't be correct. Let me jump in and see what our function's actually doing, because that shouldn't have passed straight away. If we do our input, let's now reload the code, and we'll see what happens when we run that. So actually, yeah, we are returning that in the correct way. Let me change the order of things and see if that changes anything, because I feel like that may just be a result of having the correct order applied. So what I'll do in here is I'll just paste that in, reload the code, and call our function again. So that's just working straight out for some reason. Let's see if I can explain why. That shouldn't be working, and I'll tell you the reason why it shouldn't be working is that here in our sort function, where's our sort function, get lines to print, we're only sorting by the points. We're not sorting by the name at all. So it seems just by pure luck that because the map, if what we do here, if we do an io.inspect here, and an io.inspect here, and an io.inspect here, we should be able to see why this is just working straight out. Let's reload the code, call that again, and we can see the first time we pass it, because a map by default is going to automatically alphabetically sort things, right? When we alphabetically sort it, it's going to, just as a map, it's going to be alphabetically sorted. So here we have it, we already have it alphabetically sorted. And now if we sort it by the points, it's going to maintain the order that we had before we started sorting it. So with this sort, because we have equality, this equality here, if I change this to just greater than, that will actually break because we have points where they're equal. What it's done is, because sort, I believe this is stable. Let's have a look. enum.sortBy, and we'll see if it has anything about that. So it only differs by sort. Let's see here, sort's enumerable, uses the merge sort algorithm. So it doesn't have, it doesn't explain whether or not it's, here we go. The sorting algorithm will be stable as long as the given function returns true for values considered equal. And what they mean by stable is that the original order is going to be maintained if things are equal. So here, sum and kind are going to appear after of, but they should still appear in that same order. That's what we mean by stability. And because they're equal, and we have a function that is doing equality, they will be in the same order that they appeared originally. So here we don't actually need to do any complex sorting, just by virtue of the fact that we're converting a map to a list, which will automatically sort by the keys, so the name of our team. All we need to do now is just do the regular sort by the points, and because of the stability of the sort function, it's going to all work the way that we expect. I've just got a question in Twitch. What macOS version am I using? I believe I'm still using Sierra. Let me have a look. Yeah, I've still got High Sierra. I haven't updated to Mojave just because I've actually been busy and doing things. I'm going to have to take my Mac to the store today to get the spacebar key fixed, and the new version that I have tomorrow, the Mac version that I have tomorrow, may be Mojave. Anyway, let's jump back in. Let's make sure that this is still working. So yes, we actually have the correct behavior right at the beginning. And what we'll do back in the tests, since we've passed that test, surprisingly to me, is we're going to do the final one where they've actually passed us some invalid lines. For instance, we've got the empty string at the start here. We have an @ symbol instead of a semicolon. And what's expected to happen here is that we ignore the invalid lines. And this should work just because what we've done in here, in our after our split, we've done a case and we've matched on very, very specific outputs of that case. And if it doesn't match, we're just going to ignore those lines. So we should still pass that test. Let me quit out of IEX, run the tests, and we've actually passed all the tests. And that's surprising to me. I thought we'd need to do some more complex sorting. But now that we've passed all the tests, I will go through and see if there are any opportunities to refactor. And I think probably one opportunity that we have here is that we're assigning stuff to variables here, but all we're doing is we're just passing stats to another function. So really what we could do here is just get lines to print could just be a pipe out of here. Let's remove stats. And instead of stats, this would actually just be lines to print. Let's remove this. Cool. Let's run the test again just to make sure that we haven't made it fail. We'll also check for any warnings. So we do have a warning here. Variable team is unused at line 30. I'll go to line 30, and yes, I can see that we're not outputting the team name, and all we're using is the points. So I can just put an underscore there to make the compiler happy. Very nice. We still have all the tests passing. Let's see if there are any other opportunities to refactor. In here, we have a lot of assignments. This is a little bit messy, but I think this might be the cleanest way to express what we're doing here. We could maybe put it into another function, but I think the length of this function is acceptable. So we only have 27 to 44. We have a 17-line function. That's not really enough for me to consider refactoring it. I think it's fairly clear. We've got the sort by function there, which is very small. Calculate stats, let's see here, 46 to 70. So that is a fairly long function, 24 lines, but I don't think there's a way that we could really shorten this and still have it be the same level of readability. We can't really put this case function, we can put it into another anonymous function or another a little private function down there, but honestly, I don't think it gains readability. I think this is probably fine. Our update win, update loss, and update draw functions are a little bit messy, but I think that probably if we started refactoring these, we'd get like a very, very complex function. And for these, I think that probably leaving these the way they are is going to be the cleanest. I don't like that it's split this onto multiple lines. That's killed the readability a little bit for me. Let's see if we can maybe put this into a smaller number of lines. What I'm going to do here is move that line to another line. Okay, so that's worked. I think that's a little bit more readable than this one where it's split it all onto multiple lines. So I'll go through, clean that up a little bit in there. So all I've done there is I've just taken that line from the anonymous function, moved it on to the next line, and that's sorted that out. And I'll do that once more down here, and that's just going to reduce the length of those functions, and I think for me, make them a little bit more readable. Very nice. So those are now quite short functions. Again, if we were to refactor these, I think it would just make it very, very complex for no real readability gain. We have our merge init, and that's pretty good. I'm pretty happy with that. Since we've changed the code, I'm going to rerun the tests again. Everything's still passing, and I'm going to use Exercism submit for tournament.exs. Just make sure that that goes through properly. I'll upload this link to my solution at the end of the video. Cool. So that's been passed. I'm going to mark it as complete, and then what I can do is share published solution with everyone. So I'll put that in the description of the video, and anyone that wants to see my solution for posterity can see it there. Awesome. Thanks very much for watching, everyone. We'll see you next time with another Exercism coding challenge. Thanks for tuning in. If you liked the video, please subscribe on Twitch or on YouTube. If you liked the video, please give it a like. And otherwise, send me a message if you have any questions. You can also comment, and I'll reply to any comment that you paste. Thanks very much for watching. See you next time.